Welcome to our 44 New Voices speaker series, where we're interviewing selectees from our inaugural 44 New Voices list. My name is Carmella Boykin, and today I'm joined by Saira Rao, who is so many things. She's an author, an entrepreneur, co-founder of Race to Dinner, most recently co-founder of Haven Media, and a racial justice activist. So Saira, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. What a week, huh?
Definitely, absolutely. This past Wednesday, we had the House impeach President Donald Trump. That'll move to the Senate later on. So a lot has happened. But more specifically, when our team selected you to be on our list a while back, way back in 2020, you caught our attention with your company Race to Dinner, which you co-founded with Regina Jackson, where you have dinner with white women to talk about their racism, even when they tell you they're not racist and that all white people aren't racist. So what made you decide to start hosting these dinners?
Sure. So let me just start by saying, in this moment, like literally today would be a great example of not all white people privilege. What is not all white people privilege? It's white terrorists literally have attacked the US Capitol, and not all white people are being racially profiled for being terrorists. Okay, so let's just be clear, like that's what we're dealing with, right? That's essentially why we started it, is because sure, like obviously it's very easy to point your fingers at these people with guns and grenades and trying to like go into the Capitol and hold people hostage, right? But what about everybody else? What about the, first of all, white women were actually there, right? But what about the white women who were at home making dinner before these guys got on buses and planes and whatever? So those are like the conservatives, right? But what about the white liberals who are cousins and aunts and, you know, whatever, that have heard these people, their family members, their colleagues say things over time and have remained silent? So that's who we're dealing with, right? Sort of the genesis of Race to Dinner is I ran for Congress in 2018 on an explicitly racism platform in Denver, Colorado, which is one of the bluest districts in the country and also one of the whitest districts in the country. And you know, I'm a middle-aged Asian in the middle of the country. Do I look that scary to you? You would have thought that I was a terrorist the way that these white people treated me. You know, like the fact that I was even talking about racism. And so it was a quick campaign, 5 months, but without fail at every single event, there was a line of white ladies out the door, all super liberal, you know, Hillary Clinton loving, pearl clutching white ladies who would be waiting for me to tell me every time it's not them that's racist. I'm not racist, not me, not all white people. So I had to deal with this for 5 months because I was running for office. So I'd meet them for coffee, I'd meet them for drinks, I'd meet them for dinner, for them to tell me this. And of course they didn't vote for me because I was running against a super liberal white woman, Diana DeGette, who's now an impeachment manager for this second impeachment. Anyway, it ended and I became, I'll spare the details, I became a hit for Breitbart, Fox News, the alt-right, and I had to like leave Denver with my family for a while because it got really scary. And when I returned, Regina Jackson, who had worked on my campaign, Regina is a Black woman here in Denver, calls me up one day and says to me, you know, her friend, will call her Karen. Her friend Karen loses her mind on my Facebook because I called Beto O'Rourke a white savior. That was the straw that broke Karen's back, Beto O'Rourke being a white savior. And so Regina calls me and she says, Karen called me and said that she's done with you, that you hate all white people. And I'm like, whatever. And she said, but she wants to know if you'll have lunch with her. And I was like, of course she does. Like that, she wants to tell me it's not her. And so I had a list of white ladies who had already been asking about that. So I was like, how about this, Regina? You come with me. We'll have dinner with Karen and we'll put together this other crew of white ladies. And we did it. We had a dinner and it was batshit. I mean, this Karen went crazy. She was crying and screaming and yelling. And it was a full, like, you know, White Woman, the Broadway musical in that one dinner. So we left. I mean, seriously, it was like, it wasn't a 3-act play. It was like a 30-act play. You can probably imagine what that was, right?
That's quite a picture, yeah.
And so whatever, I actually took my kids to India for the first time, like a week after that. And I come back from the holiday and I run into this Karen on the street. And of course, I mean, classic, she's like listening to White Fragility on her phone. And she was like, I finally get it. I want to host a dinner at my house with some of my friends. And so Regina and I were like, okay, let's go. So we went. This is a couple months later. And we go, she hasn't told her white friends why they're there. They think they're just coming for a dinner party. So we didn't know that they didn't know. And so the next thing you know, literally within 5 minutes, when I told the white lady to my right, she's a yoga instructor in Boulder, that white people, like for the most part, teaching yoga in this country are culturally appropriating. This other lady reaches over, doesn't even know this one, and tries to grab me and tells me I need to apologize to this woman. I mean, this is how it starts. We have someone in the corner crying already. We have a white woman over here who's a quote civil rights lawyer who keeps dropping the N word, but to like just saying it like she used to be called an N word lover when she was small because her parents were civil rights people. I mean, like sitting next to Regina, and then has the audacity to say, do you even know what it's like to be called an N word lover? To a Black woman who has lived through Jim Crow. I mean, you really?
Yeah,
So
that's
we
bold.
left and I had to hire a babysitter. You know, we're not getting paid for this. I had to hire a babysitter and I get home and I'm like, you know what? Shame on them first 1 million times, but shame on me, 1 million, 1 billionth time. So I just went to Facebook the next day and I was like, kind of just rehashing what happened. And it went viral. Like it went totally viral. And so Regina and I are like, okay, we might as like, there seems to be an appetite for this. And hence Race to Dinner was born. It was less than 2 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be really intense too, because I know you talked about how like in these dinners, I mean, provided you didn't know what you were walking into, like you said that they didn't know, the other white women didn't know what they were talking about, but being one of two people of color in the room, you said you don't have other people of color in the rooms that way, like the spotlight isn't on them, it's just about like you having a conversation. That's got to be really intense to bear that weight. So how do you kind of hold those conversations in a way that I suppose can be productive without people feeling like they're attacked despite them being in the majority?
Well, you and I know how white people are. They feel attacked if you call them white. I mean, they're in their minds, they've been attacked because they've been called white. And so I'll be honest with you, Carmella, like it's feeling less safe. So explicitly, there are various reasons we haven't worked with men. Number one, I have received ample death threats. My family has. Lots of people have guns in this country. And so at base, we don't want to be in a room where there's a higher likelihood that someone's going to pull out a gun and kill us. That's the reality. And I think we can all not pretend anymore that that's not the reality, Number two, Regina and I have a thesis of intersectionality. So Regina's Black, I'm brown. And we are at every dinner, these white ladies try to pit us against each other because that is how white supremacy persists, is dividing and conquering. And so it's a radical act, even that the two of us are impervious to their nonsense. And so we are together, and our thesis is if these women can stop picking, liberal women, if these women can stop picking whiteness and start picking their gender over whiteness, we can actually overthrow patriarchy, right? Like that's intersectional feminism. We can do that. So that's our thesis, right? It's feeling less and less safe. And we just had our first in real life Race to Dinner last week on Friday, 2 days after the coup, since COVID.
Mm.
And, we agreed to do it for a host of reasons. One, that it was going to be COVID friendly. It's arguable whether or not it was COVID safe. But also we actually wanted to kind of have a stamp in our minds of, okay, this is 2 days after the coup. We had agreed to it before, but this is post, their great racialized awakening from the summer. On the heels of this coup, my thesis and Regina's thesis is not only have they not changed, but they've gotten worse because we've felt the white lash since like August, September. And it coincides with the top 10 books on best-selling books over the summer were white fragility, Ibram Kendi, so on and so forth. Now it's back to white self-help books and cookbooks. So it's really like showing how white people are like, we're done with that. We did racism this summer, right? And so these women in this room, it's the first time I can safely say that it felt unsafe to me. They were nasty.
Really?
They were nasty. It was, and these are heads of companies. These are heads of big nonprofits. These are leaders in the community, and card-carrying Democrats, And so it's not that, it doesn't feel safe. I mean, they were openly hostile towards Regina and I, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse because you know what they're doing? They're seeing the coup and they're really able now in their minds to be like, that's not us. It used to be, we're not the KKK, we're not saying the N-word, we're not saying this, we're not doing that, we're not burning crosses. That was sort of from the past, right? And then it was, we're not Charlottesville. Now they're actually able to look and point at all the images that are happening online right now, all over the place, and saying, that's not us. So they're actually be able to distance themselves more and more, which feels less and less safe to be in rooms with them, frankly.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because racism, being racist and racism isn't always that overt, really loud white supremacy that we saw at the Capitol, right? It can be little things that have a larger impact. So what were some of those conversations like? Can you be shocked by what they said? What were some of the most impactful things they said?
Sure. First of all, even the term microaggression is racist, because there's nothing, you and I both know that there's nothing micro about a microaggression. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Even the term white fragility is racist, because you're diminishing. White fragility is white supremacy. That's what it is, right? White fragility is white supremacy, but we call it fragility. We call it fragility because white people are so fragile, they can't even hear the words white supremacy. So to give you an example of what happened this past week, and I never name names, I would never do that, so whatever. Let's see, a European woman flipped out, white European woman flipped out, immigrant here, because she claimed that she's not white because she's European. And she refused to be lumped together with other white people. And she felt it was violence that we kept referring to her as a white person. I'm just confused. Isn't the queen white? She's also European. And so then we asked, do you know the difference between race and ethnicity? Again,
Yeah, that's a great question.
these are leaders in the state, not a single one, 9 of them. Another one was an Elizabeth Warren Native American white woman who also refused to be lumped in with the other white women because she had just done the DNA test and she was 5% Native American. So they kept saying it was violent that we were referring to all of them as white women because of this, quote, Native American woman, this white Native American woman, and the European. Another white woman, she's the head of a tech company, and she claimed that white women were received more oppression than Black and brown men, because Black and brown men had more access to capital than white women. False. And when I brought up, so you think that like George Floyd has more privilege than you? You think, for example, my South Asian male relatives who are literally strip searched at the mall, I mean, not the mall, at the airport every time, have more privilege? And she just went like this. This is what we got a lot of. That we could, I mean, it was diminishing. Anytime we said, and so I used an example. I said, how can you say that? Like, so even using my husband as an example, my husband is, a South Asian man. He is constantly racially profiled. And I said, so he has more privilege than you. He's strip searched all the time. Like his children, like we've been given pictures online of our children with the terms Muslim, like we want to see your children's bodies floating in the Ganges. We have more privilege than you. Like, and it didn't even, she didn't even think those questions warranted a response. This is all we got. And Regina just asked over and over again. I'm so confused after how we could have had this whole year. You honest to God think Black men in this country have more privilege than you. And she didn't think it warranted, it was just this. So that's what we're dealing with. And these are the good liberals. These are the good Germans, right? And so we are screwed. I mean, if this is the resistance, these women literally have hashtag BLM and resistance all over their Instagrams and their Facebooks.
That's really interesting. And I'm curious, is there a way to kind of, what it sounds like you're saying is basically they just turn off when you're having these conversations and you bring up a bunch of examples, they just like turn off and don't associate, which is really interesting because within like communities of color, there's the idea of colorism, right? And so like the lighter you are, like the more I have a hard time saying this because it's disrespectful and it's like wrong and gross, but like the lighter you are, the more accepted you can be in society, right? And so some people of color are born with the appearance of being white, and so they're treated as white people in society. And so I'm curious, have you talked about like colorism? So even if they identify as native or, you know, whatever minority, they still have those kinds of privileges. So
We
what's
tried
that
having
like?
that conversation. And by the way, that's true in every, I mean, white supremacy, right? White supremacy is here. So whiteness is king. And what's at the bottom of that, right? If you're critical race theory, it's anti-Black racism. So you need, in order to have white supremacy, you have to have something here, right? Anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and everything in between. And of course, everyone's aspiring to whiteness because that's where the power is. India, my God, I went, you know, we took my kids to India. We were in my dad's hometown. It's 100% Indian. There's not a single non-Indian, and South Indian. We're dark, you know, dark-skinned South Asians. I took my kids to the mall. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to buy my daughter. There's going to be a whole portfolio of South Asian dolls for her to pick from. I wish I had the picture, all white. Every doll in that store is
Really?
white in 100% South Asian. Why? The British were there, you know, white supremacy. So colorism for these white women, I mean, we're dealing with 101, right? But we did get into it. So I gave an example. I have white friends who have married Indian men, and their kids are, some of them, their kids are not white passing. Some of their kids are white passing. And the ones who, you know, the ones who were fragile early on, who've literally come around, like, you know, people do come around, will say things like, in one case, my friend has 2 boys, completely white passing. One of them is blonde, blue-eyed, right? And she would say to me, well, but my kids are Indian too. And so blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, they could identify ethnically as being Indian, but you can see that they have white privilege, white male privilege in their case. And she couldn't see it at first, you know, and they couldn't see it at first. But now they do, obviously. So there's a, you know, you have to, we tried explaining that to this woman who also told us that she couldn't understand when she was in college why Black athletes found her attractive, and she did everything in her power to be less attractive to Black athletes. And now she is claiming her Indigenous heritage. I mean, there's so, how do you even talk to someone like that, who is completely unwilling to see how her behaviors and her statements and her thinking is mired in white supremacy? Like you can't even have this conversation around colorism with people like that.
Yeah, that's definitely challenging too when people aren't willing to have that conversation. Can you talk a bit about the process that your friend had to go through to get to the point where she could actually like understand what you were talking about? What's that middle ground between being, you know, completely like, oh, my son, even though he looks white, you know, he's Indian too, and then also now like her seeing like what you were talking about?
This is what we're trying to figure out, Carmella, to be honest, because now it's been hundreds of women, and the ones who shut off and go away forever and frankly become more racist, you know, that's one. But then there are the ones who don't and actually stick with the work. And we've been in deep conversations with a lot of these women in terms of what was the change, what happened, what made you get back up. You know, common things, it's not class, it's race. I grew up poor, you know. Nobody is saying if you're white that your life has been easy. I mean, nobody is saying that. It's just saying that the hardships that you've endured have nothing to do with your skin color. That's it. That's what white privilege is, right? White skin privileges. How do you get them to see it? And one thing that has kind of worked over time is really honing in the gender analysis. So white women expect men to see what we expect of them to see in terms of race. And so they, you know, they'll be like, oh, sexist asshole, my husband's a sexist, this, or my colleague, whatever. It's so obvious how sexist they are, right? So they expect them to be able to analyze their own sexism, but they refuse to take a look at themselves. So if they hear it like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 times, at some point it comes around. So in our experiences, you never know. You literally never know. It could be the wokest white woman who shows up and she leaves never again to be engaged in the work. And it could be the most closed off, you know, white woman in the room who has been kind of quiet the whole dinner, who shows up 6 months later and is ready to keep going with the work and has like has gotten her friends involved. That is the key. What makes them, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think it's different for everyone. It goes for me too. I mean, I've been trying to get Asians to understand our own self-loathing, our deep colonization and our own self-loathing and our own anti-Black racism. And I'm shocked by the Asians who have come around. I mean, plenty. I've been so ostracized by the South Asian community, not just sort of all over the place, but even the kids I grew up with in Richmond. And then it's like these random South Asians, sometimes men, South Asian men who like actually are willing to just come clean and be like, yes, I am anti-Black. Yes, I am self-loathing. What makes them do it? I don't know. It's who's willing to see the elephant in the room. The elephant in America's room is racism and white supremacy, right? You can talk about class, you can't talk about race. And what makes people be able to do it? I don't know. But that is the magic. That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, that's very true. And like you mentioned, it's very individualized too. Like you said, you can never really like tell based on the individual, like what, you know, when they go through a process, what it'll turn out like at the end. But also what's individual too is realizing certain things that like you think of or have done that are like internally racist and your own internal racism that you have. You've talked about how you were raised in a primarily white surroundings in Virginia, and you were part of a white sorority in college. So at what point did you realize that you were internally racist too?
God, I think I've always known, you know, like, by the way, we used to celebrate Lee Jackson King Day. You know, MLK Day is coming up on Monday. Like we used to celebrate Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee along with MLK. So that's where I was, you know, I was marinating in this. I was, you know, we were like one of 25 Indian families in Richmond, Virginia in the 70s and 80s. And so I was taught to do everything. Assimilation in immigrant speak is being white. And I was taught what my family and our community would talk about Americans. They would talk, what they meant was white people. And it still makes them cringe when I say white people. And I'm like, stop saying Americans. We're Americans too. They'd say us, referring to us, Indians and Americans, and then Black people and Chinese people and Mexican people. But Americans were white. So I think I mean, I've known it from the start. So I was indoctrinated to feel lesser. And I remember I must have been 10 years old. And we were at a dinner, we used to all, the tiny Indian community will all hang out together. And half the dinner party, I heard the grownups talking about how racist the Americans were towards them. And then the other half of the dinner party, they spent making fun of Black people. And I was just like, this feels really weird. And I remember asking my mom on the car ride home, I was like, doesn't this feel, I don't think I used the word hypocritical, but this feels weird. And she said, well, this is just the way it is. And in a nutshell, that's it. That's the ecosystem, right? Asians have been brought into this country to prop up white people at the expense of ourselves on the backs and on the shoulders of Black people. That's it. That's the ecosystem. We all know it. You know it. Everyone knows it, but we never talk about it. Why? Because if you talk about it, then you have to do something about it. So this is being silent about it enables it to grow and flourish. Look at freaking Nikki Haley, you know? And I'm not going to not all white people, I'm not all Indian people. Nikki Haley is me. I am Nikki Haley. We are cut from the same cloth. You know, I can't say that's not me. I understand where she comes from. It's disgusting. But like, there are lots of South Asians who think like Nikki Haley, lots of them. There were people down at Indian people down at the Capitol waving Indian flags.
Yeah. And that's interesting too. What I've always found very, like you said, hypocritical, weird about minority communities is how, because a lot of communities experience a lot of, you know, racism and oppression, they're also, you get internally racist within your own groups and you get exclusionary.
Yes.
And what's very strange is when you have groups that then also discriminate against other minority groups, like, you know, the LGBTQ community, and it's very hypocritical. It doesn't quite make sense.
It's
but
the crabs in a barrel. It's a scarcity model. It's fighting over scraps.
Yeah. And what is really important though, in order to be able to kind of like hash those discussions out, are finding communities and being able to discuss that, which you've co-founded Haven Media, where other people of color can talk about those kinds of issues. So can you talk a bit more about what Haven Media is and what the goal is?
Sure. So, look, we are growing Race to Dinner. We have a new program called Race to Community for white women by a white woman on our team. So continuing to try to awaken white women will always be part of my life. But I also think what you just said, building community for Black, Indigenous, and Brown women is a huge part of my life. And so that's what Haven is. It's a digital and in real life community just for BIPOC women. And so, we had conceived of it last year. We had an in real life event in Denver, which was amazing. It was going to be predominantly in real life, and then COVID happened. So it's going to be both. It's going to be digital and in real life, but it's a place for BIPOC women to really just come together, share joy, share pain, and build community, because that's all we have is each other. And we really want to get past all of this, divide and conquer and, oppression Olympics. But that's going to require, frankly, people like me and other Asians and Latinx folks to acknowledge and dismantle our own anti-Blackness. It's just like white people looking at people of color and saying, we just need to come together. What they're saying is, we need you to forget about how shitty we've been to you. And so by coming together in community, it's going to require those of us who have caused harm to acknowledge that and try to work through it. By the way, we all come by this honestly. And part of the reason I hate this whole Karen stuff, this Soho Karen stuff, we're pinpointing blame on individual behavior rather than systems. There's some of the white women who have been dragging Amy Cooper and Soho Karen are going to be the next Soho Karen and Amy Cooper, because that's how they've been trained to do. That's what they've been trained to do. And so we have to take the sting out of this. Like, it's personal, it's systemic. And I do think that, like, us dragging each other all the time personally in some ways detracts from the bigger picture, because you're making it a personal thing. So I'll be honest, I don't take any, I probably should. And I say this and people are like, no, you probably should take it personally. I don't even take it personally, the amount of trolling that I get from white people, because I'm like, they don't know me, right? They see what I look like and what I'm saying, and they don't like it. And so Haven is a place for us to try to create something that's not in existence right now, which is, an intersectional community that's really driven by the community. So it's not going to be an influencer place. It's not going to be a top-down place. We're in the process of building our community, so every BIPOC woman in this country feels like there's a place for them.
And speaking of not being like promoting influencers within your community, often there are influencers that get most of like the opportunities for speaking for like BIPOC opportunities for people, or for opportunities for people of color. Why is it important that it's not an influencer community? And who are some new voices in media that you're looking out for that are growing that don't necessarily fall into the influencer sphere?
Well, so that's funny. That's what I was thinking about this. And first of all, influencer culture is based in capitalism. It's celebrity culture, essentially, right? So that's not inclusive at all. And, we want to make sure that people who work at McDonald's and people who, might be a nurse in Seattle, like people who typically don't have blue checks next to their names, feel included instead of seeing the same people over and over and over again, right? I think it's really a disaster to put people on pedestals ever, because when you put people on pedestals, you can flush them down the toilet, and with them goes their movement. And so we talk about this at Race to Dinner a lot. We're asked all the time, who should we follow? Who should we follow on Twitter? Who should we follow on Instagram? And we used to have a laundry list of names, and we've stopped doing it. And so I'm not going to give you names of people to follow, because I'll tell you why. Part of the journey is doing the work. And instead of having people tell you who to follow, who to see, is lazy, right? It's people need to do their own work. Number one. Number two, we're not a monolith, right? Like follow tons of people, follow tons of brown women, Black women, Indigenous women, and see who resonates with you. Off the top of my head, look at Georgia, the amount of work that Black organizers did was incredible. And it wasn't just Stacey Abrams. There were so many Black organizers. What the Asian American community did in Georgia was incredible. Google it. Google Asian American, political organizers, Georgia. It's incredible. What the indigenous and Latinx communities and activists did in Arizona to get out the vote in November was incredible. I'll just talk briefly about Denver. We've heard tons about Lauren Boebert, the new woman in Congress who is carrying a gun and is making a big stink about it. That's now like the Colorado celebrity. What about Candy C. DeBaca? She is an indigenous / Latinx new member of the city council. She is killing herself to make sure that homeless folks are fed and are given basic human rights. We never hear about Candy C. DeBaca. I mean, outside of Denver, you hear a lot about her here, but outside of Denver, there are lots of Candy C. DeBacas around the country. So I think that the best thing any of us can do sincerely is start investing in our own communities. Start Googling our activists in your community. Who is a climate activist in your community? Who is an anti-poverty activist in your community? Who is an anti-racism activist in your community? Do the work, follow a ton of people, and then see whose voice resonates. Because I do think it's dangerous to just say this person is the best voice in anti-racism work, because that person might not resonate with you. And then you're going to be like, oh, I'm done with anti-racism work. It takes you out of the game altogether. But maybe this person and this person resonates with you. Yeah, I'm certainly not everyone's cup of tea. So it's, I get it. And so I would hate for people to leave anti-racism work altogether because they were told to follow me and they're like, that woman sucks.
Yeah, just like we were talking about before, it's very individual. That growth process is individual. Finding who you respect and really speaks to you is individual as well. One last thing before we go, you've got a new book coming out that you're co-authoring, White Woman, Everything You Need to Know About Your Own Racism and How to Do Better. That comes out in 2022, I believe. Is there anything else that you would like to promote going forward that we can keep an eye out for from you?
I hope all the BIPOC women will follow Haven. Just go to havenmedia.org. And I hope all the white women will go to racetodinner.com. And we've got tons of programming. Sign up for something and see what works for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
And that's what we
Yes, absolutely. That's what we have for my interview with Saira Rao. Make sure you tune in for our next interview coming soon.